In 1981, an engineer at Apple invented a term for something he couldn't explain. His name was Bud Tribble. He'd just watched Steve Jobs tell a room full of programmers that the Macintosh would ship in 10 months. The timeline was impossible. Everyone in that room knew it. But here was the strange part. By the time Jobs left the meeting, half of them believed it could happen. Tribble pulled aside a new engineer named Andy Hertzfeld and warned him. Steve has a reality distortion field. He borrowed the phrase from Star Trek, an episode where aliens create an entire world through sheer mental force. But Tribble meant it as more than a metaphor. In his presence, he said, reality is malleable. He can convince anyone of practically anything. It wears off when he's not around, but it makes it hard to have realistic schedules. Over the next 3 decades, that field would produce some of the greatest products ever made. It would also destroy careers, break families, and, according to some who knew him, eventually kill Steve Jobs himself. This is how one man learned to bend reality, and what it cost him. The distortion field wasn't charisma. It wasn't persuasion. It was something stranger. Debbie Coleman, who ran manufacturing for the Macintosh, described it this way. He laser-beamed in on you and didn't blink. It didn't matter if he was serving purple Kool-Aid, you drank it. The engineers called it a confounding mélange, part rhetoric, part will, part an eagerness to bend any fact to fit whatever he needed to be true in that moment. Here's what made it work. Jobs didn't argue. He declared. When he said a circuit board was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, or that a product was complete shit, he wasn't offering an opinion. He was stating a fact about the universe and daring you to disagree. Bill Atkinson, one of Apple's most brilliant designers, said, "He can deceive himself." It allowed him to con people into believing his vision because he has personally embraced and internalized it. That was the key. Jobs didn't lie. He believed. And because he believed, impossible timelines got met. One engineer recalled Jobs asking, "If it could save a person's life, would you find a way to shave 10 seconds off the boot time?" A few weeks later, the Macintosh booted 28 seconds faster. The team had t-shirts made. They said, 90 hours a week and loving it. They weren't being ironic. But here's what nobody talked about. The field worked in both directions. Jobs could bend other people's reality, but he could also bend his own. To understand where this power came from, you have to go back to a living room in Mountain View, California, 1961. Steve Jobs was 6 years old. He was sitting on the lawn when the girl across the street asked him a question. His parents had told him he was adopted. "So, does that mean your real parents didn't want you?" Jobs later said, "Lightning bolts went off in my head." He ran inside, crying. His parents sat him down and said something he would repeat for the rest of his life. "We specifically picked you out." Abandoned, chosen, special. Those 3 words became the operating system of his psychology. A colleague named Del Yocum put it bluntly. His desire for complete control of whatever he makes derive from the fact that he was abandoned at birth. He wants to control his environment, and he sees the product as an extension of himself. Andy Hertzfeld, who worked alongside Jobs for years, saw something deeper. He thinks there are a few people who are special, people like Einstein and Gandhi, and he's one of them. He once even hinted to me that he was enlightened. This wasn't arrogance. It was architecture. If you believe the rules don't apply to you, if you felt since childhood that you exist outside the normal order, then reality becomes negotiable. A suggestion, a rough draft you can edit. Jobs never studied Nietzsche, but he lived the philosopher's idea of the Übermensch, the man whose will is so strong that he can impose his values onto the world. The problem is, that power doesn't come with a safety switch. In 1978, Steve Jobs' girlfriend, Chris Ann Brennan, gave birth to a daughter. They named her Lisa. Jobs was 23 years old, the same age his biological father had been when he abandoned him. He denied the child was his for years, even after a paternity test showed a 94.41% probability he was the father. Jobs told a reporter from Time magazine that 28% of the male population of the United States could be the father. The math made no sense. But the reality distortion field doesn't require math. A friend who knew both of them said, "He who is abandoned is an abandoner." Jobs later admitted he was wrong. "I wish I had handled it differently," he said. "I could not see myself as a father then, so I didn't face up to it." But notice the language. He didn't say he chose not to see it. He said he couldn't see it. The field had done its work. The same pattern repeated in 2003 when Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He had a rare, treatable form. Doctors urged immediate surgery. Jobs refused. For 9 months, he insisted he could cure it with diet, acupuncture, and herbal remedies. He told people what he wanted to be true, and then he believed it. By the time he finally agreed to surgery, the cancer had spread. His biographer asked him directly, "Do you regret delaying treatment?" Jobs said, "I don't want to talk about it." The reality distortion field could make engineers work miracles. It could launch products that changed the world. But it couldn't tell the difference between bending reality and breaking yourself. Jobs understood something most people never grasp. The thoughts you repeat become the reality you live. He read books on primal therapy. He believed that if you could access and reshape your deepest mental patterns, you could recover what was lost and live more fully. He was onto something. Modern behavioral science confirms it. The stories you tell yourself, day after day, literally rewire your brain. The question is whether those stories are serving you or whether they're running on autopilot, distorting your reality without your permission. There's an app called Affirmations that actually applies this. 5 minutes a day, based on cognitive behavioral principles, designed to help you take control of your mental patterns instead of being controlled by them. It's free to start. Link in the description. In his final years, something shifted. Jobs reconnected with Lisa, the daughter he once denied. She moved in with his family. He paid for Harvard. When he was dying, she was at his bedside. He also reconnected with his biological sister, the novelist Mona Simpson. Through her, he learned the full story of his birth parents, and he made a kind of peace with it. Near the end, his biographer asked what drove him. Jobs said, "We try to use the talents we do have to express our deep feelings, to show our appreciation of all the contributions that came before us, and to add something to that flow." He paused, then added something strange. "I like to think that something survives after you die. It's strange to think that you accumulate all this experience and maybe a little wisdom, and it just goes away." Then he smiled slightly. "But, on the other hand, perhaps it's like an on-off switch. Click, and you're gone." He looked at the biographer. "Maybe that's why I never liked to put on-off switches on Apple devices." Steve Jobs died on October 5, 2011. He was 56. The products he created changed how billions of people live. The company he built became the most valuable on Earth. But the man who could bend everyone else's reality spent decades unable to see the truth about himself, his daughter, his disease, his own mortality. The reality distortion field was real, and it never turned off.